Sines, it's the law of sines. Sin A over A equals sin B over B. Sin C over C equals those as well. Today we're going to learn about the law of sines. The law of sines is used to solve for unknown side lengths and angle measurements. The law of sines is the sine of angle A over side length A equals the sine of angle B over side length B, and the sine of angle C over side length C. Now let's use this to solve our own problem. So now let's say that we have a triangle where we don't know the measurement of angle A, the measurement of side length B, or the measurement of side length C. Now we can use the law of sines to figure out these unknown measurements. So let's start with figuring out the measurement of angle A. So to figure out the measurement of angle A, we know that the angles in a triangle add up to be 180. So we can add up the measurements of angle C and angle B, which would equal 104, and we can subtract 104 from 180 to figure out the measurement of angle A. So angle A equals 76 degrees. So now we can use our formula for the law of sines to figure out side length B and side length C. So let's start with side length B. So we can use the law of sines if we input our numbers. So the sine of angle A, which is 76, over side length A, which equals 6, is equal to the sine of angle measurement B over side length B. So now we need to cross multiply so that we can figure out our unknown side length. So when we cross multiply, we get the sine of 58 times 6 equals the sine of 76 times the side length of B. Now, let's put the sine of 58 times 6 into our calculator so we can figure out what that number is. So when we put the sine of 58 into our calculator, we get 0.84804 and so on. So after this, we need to put in the sine of 58 times 6. So when we do this by 6, we get 5.088288 and so on. Now that we have this number, we need to divide this number by the sine of 76 so that we can get B alone and we can figure out what it equals. So now let's try inputting this into our calculators. So now when we input this into our calculators, we get 5.244 and so on. So when we round this number, we can come to a conclusion that the side length of B equals 5.24. Now we can solve for the side length of C. So now we have the information for everything but the side length of C. So now we can put it into our formula and figure out our last missing side length. So now we can take the sine of 76 over 6 like we did in our first problem, but this time we equal it to the sine of 46, which is the angle measurement of C, over the side length of C. Now we need to cross multiply so that we can figure out our last missing side length. So now, when we cross multiply, we get the sine of 46 times 6 equals the sine of 76 times C. Now let's try putting the sine of 46 times 6 into our calculator. But first, we need to figure out what the sine of 46 is. When we input the sine of 46 into our calculator, we get 0.7193. After this, we need to multiply this number by 6 so we can get the value for this part of the equation. When we input this into our calculator, we get 4.316. Now we have to take this number and divide it by the sine of 76 so that we have C alone and we can figure out the last missing side length. Now we need to input this into our calculator. When we input that into our calculator, we get 4.448 and so on. So when we round that, we have 4.45 as the missing side length of C. Now we have every piece of information about this triangle. Congratulations! You've completed a full problem using the law of sines. So now let's try another example with a triangle that looks like this. First, we have to figure out what the missing angle is, just like we did in the last one. We can use the same technique that we used in the last one and find out that the missing angle equals 80. Again with this problem, now we can set up the sine of angle A over side length A equals the sine of angle B over side length B, just like we did in the last one. After that, we get the sine of 77 times 14 equals the sine of 80 times B. Then insert the sine of 77 into your calculator and you get 0.97. Next, try that times 14 and see if you get 13.64, just as you should. Then we have to set 13.64 equal to the sine of 80 times b to figure out what b is. But then, to continue our process, we have to divide it by the sine of 80 so that we can get b alone. But we can't just divide one side by the sine of 80, we have to divide both sides. So when we input that into our calculator, we get 13.85, and that is what the side length of B equals. Next, we have to set it up just as we did the last one to find out the side length of C. Then we'll get the sine of 23 times 14 equals the sine of 80 times C. Now try putting the sine of 23 into your calculator and see what you get. That's right, you should get 0.39 and so on. Now try that times 14 and see what you get then. You should have 5.47. Now we need to do the last and final step so that we can get C alone and figure out the side length of C just as we did the side length of B. As you can remember in the last problem, you have to divide it by the sine of 80. Once you do that, you can figure out that the side length of C equals 5.55. Then, if you put that right next to your triangle, you've successfully completed another problem using the law of sines.
Sines, it's the law of sines. Sine A over A equals sine B over B. Sine C over C equals those as well.